Also, you should be able to share your screen if you have slides as well. Um, there we go. It's recording.
Ready for me to begin?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, Good afternoon, everybody, or morning for some. Um, Thank you all for having me. Again, this was sort of last minute, so I threw together some slides when I learned the topic was, kind of anything related to environmental justice. It kind of threw me for a minute. But what I'm going to talk about today is basically using some mapping tools for asset mapping. And I wasn't sure about um, the makeup of the audience, but what I'm going to be going through is sort of participatory mapping using some particular mapping tools. One particular tool called Scribble Maps. I'll discuss some other tools, but I wanted to introduce that one as a free tool and one that is sort of really easy entry point, if you will, for many beginning users. So whether you're working with community members or you're working, well, all community members, but also if you're just working with students, then this could be a good entryway. So what I decided to do for today's talk was to sort of modify a presentation that I have given at the what it's called the Gulf Water Just oh, I'm wearing a shirt actually. Gulf Water Justice Training Institute. And so y'all probably can't see it, but I'll show. So it's the Gulf Water Training Institute. And we well, coincidence. um so uh, my colleague David Paget and I host a series of workshops related to flooding. And in that workshop, in the series, we discuss different aspects of flooding, flood management, risk, and we look at um, whether we can use tools and data that's accessible and available to determine or help decision making in terms of the need for insurance or what have you. But one of the key things that we do is we introduce some of these mapping tools so that individuals, residents, community members, community-based organizations can advocate for themselves. And I think it's a great way to get community members involved, but also to get students involved. And so that's sort of the context of this talk, and I hope that it is helpful for some of you all. So the context of the talk will be around flooding, but and how I go through the presentation, at least the initial presentation, to get to the tools. So I'm going to run through some slides pretty quickly, and again, hopefully you'll bear with me. And again, I want to thank you all for having me. My colleague Cari Harris is doing some climate justice work. I think today's the first day of her vacation or something. So she reached out, and I was able to step in. Um, I will also share that I may leave a few minutes early because I have a thesis defense committee member that's right at the top of the hour. So I, that'll help me keep my talk pretty short. I have I think there's 80 or so slides that I narrowed down to 40 or 50. And I'm going to try to probably talk like 20. so, uh, so again, bear with me. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me open this up here. Uh, and and for those of you who don't know me, I will also tell a little bit about myself. So I'm an associate professor at Tennessee State University, also past president of National Association of Geoscience Teachers. So While I wasn't completely familiar with clean, I know that was part of the whole ecosystem of um, of what NEGT and CERC offers. So glad that sort of like coming back to family in my community. Can everybody see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, great. Um, Again, I'll try to keep it brief, but I'll give you a rundown of what we go through here. So, um, in in this context, again, it's flood related activities, and I usually go through an introduction of flooding, flood risk, and stormwater infrastructure, including um, green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, and I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. And then working with community members, we do sort of a virtual walkthrough using some mapping tools about what their community looks like, what they've experienced, what they can point to in a map, and those kinds of things. So we introduce mapping tools, but also the science behind flooding, so that there's a better understanding as community members move through putting together their own advocacy or their own presentations or meetings or anything to help support their causes related to uh, mapping hazards or other risk, flood risk, including it could be toxins, it could be pollutants, it could be any of those risks. But and so we go through sort of the science and then the tools and do this walkthrough to understand their own lived experiences. And then we go through creating a map using these free tools to help them understand what flood risk might look like in their communities. So go through and I start with these questions, what do you know about floods or flooding? Uh, um, has anyone experienced flooding, or can you think of reasons why floods might be beneficial? And just to kind of get a discussion going. And then we talk about, what flooding is. So this is sort of introductory slide just to again generate some discussion and get people thinking about what their own experiences are. I'm sure many of you have experiences. If you come into a crowd sometimes may not be familiar with what you're talking about, then they kind of just stare at you and it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So this kind of gets the conversation going and sort of lowers uh, the 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 nervousness, if you will. And so it's kind of helpful to do that. And I provide some examples of different both examples of actual events, but also news stories that include some maps that, again, to provide context and to keep the mapping and geospatial tools in mind. So in my regular day job at Tennessee State University, I'm in the Department of Environmental Sciences, uh, but my area is applied geographic information systems or geospatial information systems and sciences. I teach most of the courses in our GIS certificate program and our master's environmental science program. Anything that has to do with GIS and mapping, I'm usually the person that they run to, and I'm happy to do it. So most of the presentations and the context that I provide, there are usually maps involved. So I provide examples. Here's a National Weather Service map that um, I thought was down. It seems to still be available, but sometimes when I click on the link, it says page not available, and then it shows up after a few minutes. So may or may not be impacted by current state of affairs. But I present this map to show sort of the interaction that can be done with maps. And so this is one of those maps where it is interactive. Click on the link, you can go to the map and see. And I provide other examples of different news articles and events and how weather and climate and how they may lead to flooding events or precipitation events that may lead to flooding events and to demonstrate the risk. We talk about whether flooding is a natural process or not, or is it always a natural process, and what can impact flooding, and how flooding can continue even after the rain stops, and different kinds of flooding. So we talk about the causes of flooding, different causes of flooding, and also go through sort of the water cycle to give the context of the natural processes that may lead to flooding events, precipitation, etc., where all the water is found on Earth and where the water is coming from, and um, and so present some of these graphics to just give an understanding of the water cycle. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I do have the chat here, but just raise your hand. I can if you have any questions, I'm going through this. But this presentation to you all is not necessarily to instruct you all on any of this, but unless you have questions, I can definitely share. But it's really to just go through how I go through this presentation with different groups that to get to the mapping, the asset mapping part, the participatory mapping. So again, go through the floodplains and different definitions and cover the significance of what the floodplain is. And I really bring this into the conversation in order to it's sort of a lead in into the urbanization and green and gray infrastructure. And I'll show you that here in a moment. Different types of flooding, slow onset flooding or rapid onset flooding, flash floods, etc. We talk about how flash floods can be pretty destructive and fatal, and because people are taken by surprise. But there are also other impacts like disease and malnutrition that come from slow onset. So it can still lead to other conversations that have to do with flooding or that might be impacted by flooding. And we go through some of these activities. This is one activity that is an activity that comes from the cutting edge teaching activities hosted on the GetC website, which is geospatial. Geo. I'll get to it in a second. I'll remember what it is in a second. But we go through this activities and kind of, again, interact with the audience and figure out, what kind of flooding is going on in these images. The images are coming from the National Assessment of Storm Induced Coastal Change Hazards. So there's a couple of these different activities. We kind of go through them, and um, the GetC site, as linked here, is geophysics tools for societal issues, and there are other tools. A lot of these slides or information on these slides comes from the tools that are available on the CERC, ecosystem with the NAGTs on the cutting edge or GetC or Integrate, etc. So a lot of these resources are already available. Again, different activities, and then we talk about the floodplain and management, and just to look at the we also talk about calculating risk and those kinds of things, but those slides are not included here. But this is just sort of to explore the potential structures that may be found in the floodplain and how we can think about these when we're mapping assets, or who can be impacted or what is impacted, and answer some of those kinds of questions, or how we can alleviate or mitigate some flooding issues. And then we show some images about, real images of potential or flooding events, floods that have occurred and how they might look through satellite images or other types of images, and how urbanization, as you can see, when urbanization and there's high density buildings and structures, and then you have a flooding event. In this case, it might be a river flood or some flash flooding or storm surge events, and they can really impact a lot of people. So we talk about urbanization, more people moving into urban areas, demand for energy and resources and those kinds of things, and tie that into different climate change issues and conversations as well. And throughout this, provide different examples, and again, this to bring context, and so that people can kind of see themselves in their communities and how they might be impacted. We talk about green and gray infrastructure and the differences between those two, and highlight things like rain gardens and green roofs, wetlands, and how they help with reducing runoff and supporting biodiversity, and just improving water quality and that type of thing. So we discussed that, and describe how gray infrastructure is not enough and may even lead to flash flooding or other potential flooding issues, and how combining green infrastructure can be helpful. So when it comes to the asset mapping, think about, go out into your community and figure out or highlight where do you see these things? Where do you see the gray infrastructure that could become green infrastructure? Where can we integrate green infrastructure? Or where do you see green infrastructure? And let's map some of those things. So just different ideas to get folks out in the field, but also onto the mapping tools, identifying assets. We talk about different examples of the various assets or issues. This is a open ditch in Houston, and how this may be there might be sediment accumulation or other types of blockages or illegal dumping, and how that might not allow a water flow, potentially causing more flooding issues. Um, Issues such as this bus in the ditch or other issues, and then we present the different types of different channels and things of that nature that water can flow through. But also the mapping tools that demonstrate how people have mapped issues. This case is Houston, where they've mapped inadequate drainage ditches. And so what's happening with those ditches, we can provide some context there. We talk about, again, what the ditches do, but also how waste and improper disposal can impact water flow in those areas. Here's another map. And then, so this was, again, there were some impacts later on after Hurricane Harvey, where a storm inundated Houston. So again, just another example here. And we talk about the co-benefits of green infrastructure here. And these all, provide areas for discussion around what may or may not exist in certain communities. So there's a question about who located the drainage ditches, and I have to dig a little bit deeper to know exactly. I know there are a couple of websites where this data exists, and I believe it was it's one of these. I can't remember if it was the housing authority. Um, I'd have to look up the source, the um, but the maps are, and I don't even know if the maps have been updated recently. So that's a good question. I should probably know that. Um, and then I just provide a bunch of different examples of integrated green infrastructure, um, how it can mitigate flood risk and that type of thing. Examples of rain gardens and underground trenches and underground storage and infiltration systems for water, regional stormwater ponds, um, bioretention areas, and we can talk about all the different kinds of benefits for these kinds of things. Permeable surfaces, you can see here sort of in the walkway where the trees are, it's just permeable surfaces, how that helps um, some beautifying aspects of neighborhoods, rooftops, capture runoff, and so on and so forth. Also, there's porous pavement. We don't get into that too much, but it's a good way to introduce that. And the other thing that we talk about is how here's a before and after. So where can some of these things occur? And if people have good eyes for this kind of of improvement, then it could be a nice way uh, to put this into a presentation or something like that uh, for decision makers to take a look at. Decision makers, policymakers, whoever can help make this happen. Um, this is an example right here in Nashville, Tennessee, where they basically dug into the parking lot and removed the pavement, get back to the ground, the earth underneath, and open that up. So it's integrated in the parking lot, uh, and basically taking back those spaces to help provide some flood mitigation and storm runoff areas, also areas to grow some trees and other vegetation. So this is happening. I wanted to bring this up so that you can easily look into a parking lot and say, huh, this may be an area where we can improve and add some of these kinds of green infrastructure or integrated infrastructure. And so after that, we get into some of the mapping tools. And so might introduce some of ArcGIS tools. Some of you may be familiar with ArcGIS as a product. Pretty much the flagship for anything geographic information systems tools. They're sort of the Microsoft of the industry, kind of uh, uh, one of the ways I like to describe it. But um, their tools may have a cost and or maybe cost prohibitive for some community organizations to use. Even some institutions, some universities don't even have these tools. They use other free tools. And there are different free tools available, but some of them have much higher barrier to entry. I bring up the ArcGIS tools because there are so many tutorials associated with these, although you can pretty much get on YouTube and find all kinds of things. But the tool that I introduced to groups is one that I just learned about just a couple of years ago, but it does exist, and we do this sort of community flood risk exercise using this tool called Scribble Maps. And so this Scribble Map tool, and I will open it up. Here, I'll just open up on my end, and I'll show it to you in here in a moment. But this is an opportunity for now to get into the interactive mapping, and it's a very simple tool to use. It's free, although there is a paid version. So, so I go through this tutorial introducing them to this tool and asking the users, the audience, to go to their neighborhood, and they can enter their address or place a marker on any location, go to elementary school or whatever it is that we want to find. If they know where there are potential assets in their community, they can go to those, or and we talk about the various backgrounds, and I'll show you this in a moment. And then I just let them practice on their own. And here are the tools. You can draw circles and polygons and add text and draw, and then and just practice using these tools. And so what we do is, let me change my share here. So, has anybody seen Scribble Maps before?
I have not. No.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I was like, oh, this is a pretty simple tool. Let me go to it here. Yeah, so here's the Scribble Maps. And so I come into here. If I already had a map or something like that, then I can just jump in right here. I'm going to exit out of this. And so here I can go to a search. Anybody have a zip code or anything you want me to go to?
80540.
80540. Let's see if it works. Lyons, Colorado. Is that?
You got it.
All right. So here we are. Here we are in this area. I can zoom in and, okay. So not much urbanization right here, which is great. But there is this reservoir here. Is there any flooding activity in this area?
Yeah, this is a little off center. The community is a little ways away from this area. Um, and there's a
Oh,
creek that goes through that had some major flooding um, a few years ago.
okay. What's the community name?
It's Lions, but this just
Oh,
isn't showing Lions right now.
okay. I'm gonna change, get rid of the zip code. So I
There
go,
we are.
all
There's
right.
your community with the creek going through it.
Okay, then is this the creek? And I
Yeah.
don't know if you can see my cursor. All right, great. So, yeah, so this is a good example. We come to this community right here. And then, so let's say if you knew an area or somebody's yard or something like that that was, flooding after a certain event, then we might take a marker and I can go and just add a marker here. Boom. I can add a marker, title, description, you know, flooded in May 2025, right? Flood sighting or something like that, right? Maybe I know it was a couple of inches or whatever, and I can save that. And now I have this marker here, and then, or I might say, I know this whole area here, and I can easily just draw, this polygon and double click to finish. And again, I can just name it flood zone. Oh, and by the way, I mentioned flood zone. I don't know why I didn't mention this in the talk. We go through FEMA maps and talk about what the flood zones are and how they're calculated and all that stuff and the complicated. It's pretty complex if you're not familiar with the FEMA maps. So we describe all of that as well to help these community members go through this, or students or whoever. But anyway, but this is the simplicity of this map. Now I have my areas and I can draw various polygons. I can come and add some labels. I can type something in here, flood, flood areas, and I can move this around. And I can make that larger. Oh, wait a minute. Looks like I have another one here. So I can add this, and then there are all these other tools that I can use. And so I'll just lay out the activity, ask them to identify some assets, or maybe might talk about different kinds of assets to include in a map, and students can just go and play with this for a while. We can save the map and share the map. I can save it and then share it, put in my info here. Description. And I can share this link with you all or others. Click on that. This works on your phone, so you can, if you have a device, if you just have a cellular device or something like that, and not a computer or laptop or iPad or what have you, then you can also use this tool easily on the phone. I can save the image. I can create maps, and this is just, again, just a simple way to view it. I can change the base map and other things. Now there is, of course, there's a paid version that gives you a little bit more tools, but even with the free version, I can do quite a bit with this. And what I like about it is that, as I mentioned, it's pretty easy to get going with this. Doesn't require any kind of downloading or anything like that. Just come to the map and just start mapping. And I can add images if I want. So if I have an image of an area, I can add the overlay. I can do all kinds of cool stuff in here. I can draw a path and change colors and those kinds of things, labels. So I think for participatory mapping, we can use our devices. And I think I even saw this. I don't know that this was here before, but to create a team. Let me see, where did I see that? Save, right? I can create a legend and all of that, but I think it was in saving or sharing. So share a link. Well, it looked like there's a way to create a team, and I haven't tried that yet. But I can save and upload or save to any of these tools here, I can save it as a .gojson file and bring it into ArcGIS or any of these other formats. So even if I had a bunch of students or participants create their own maps and just share them with me, I can bring them into my paid tools or something to that effect, if I wanted to do that. So there are different opportunities here. Save them as images, and again, the sharing is pretty simple. You can email or embed directly from the tool. So lots of things we can do directly from here. And most of the data is, as far as I know, is fairly up to date. And I believe it's using the mapping data is coming directly from Google Maps. I believe it's pretty much the same data. And so if I wanted to look at different different background image, I can change that as well. Traffic or topographic maps, things like that. So have at it. I think this is it's kind of fun, and well, I like to play with maps, so it's probably fun for me. But I think that that it's a great tool and an entryway to do participatory mapping. And again, because it's accessible on different devices, it also makes it pretty easy. So in the context of both participatory mapping, asset mapping, environmental justice, or mapping for advocacy, it seems to have been helpful for communities and members that we worked with. And so I don't work for Scribble Maps. I just started using it. We put that out there. So I'm not trying to sell it or anything like that, but I think it's definitely an easy entry point versus some of the other tools, ArcGIS and other tools. And those tools are great. Field Maps, Survey 123, and other mapping tools are great if you have the skill set. But for entry level, this works great. So so I think I'll stop there and take questions and comments, thoughts.
Yeah, I think Scott and I were both curious about audience, who you've used this with, what's that looked like for students, what grade level, and to expand upon that, what about connecting that to the community and planning efforts?
Sorry, community and
Planning, because I was looking at this going, like, have you played with this as a planning tool to think about building community resilience and like have students map it out, brought it to the city council, things like that? Or has it been something you've used more purely as an educational tool at this point?
our audience has been it's varied. It's mostly been community-based organizations, and they have developed presentations using the maps that they've developed here. They were able to bring in their own data into the maps, like their own images and overlay and things like that, and use these maps for either working with decision makers in their community or policymakers and to enact change. I haven't seen, we've had a couple of students, but we haven't done it as a class lesson yet. I have introduced it in one of my GIS classes in my undergrad class, but just as a tool for the students to just play with. So our main tool that we use is ArcGIS. But in introducing them to different technologies, I introduced this as one of the tools as a way to create some maps on their own and bring the data in to some of the other tools. Yeah, so, but so I haven't developed any lessons around it except that tutorial that I just showed you in the slides, but no lessons, no nothing like that.
Cool. In that work, on a community side or in other settings, have you worked with younger folks, middle school, high school aged on this at all? Or has it been primarily college students and adults?
Yeah, it's been primarily college students, but I think that this would be great for elementary, middle school students, high school students. Um, I just haven't done that directly yet. I believe my colleague has. I believe my colleague Dr. Paget has. I can check with him. A presentation coming up, and he'll be talking about some asset mapping.
Yeah, I'm curious, with Carolyn, I don't know if she's hearing this or not. I ask her, because I think she works with high school students through the Gen Clio program, and they do some advocacy work on climate, and I'm wondering if, what she might think about those students using this to do some of that kind of work. Is she on?
Yeah, I'm here. There was a climate JS class that I promoted to the students for sure. I know that we do a lot of policy advocacy. I'm not the person who does that direct advocacy work. I more work on things like lesson plans and working with teachers. But I'm definitely interested in learning more about these tools and maybe covering how they might be used in classrooms and things like that.
I think some of this is even updated since last I used it, I believe.
Yeah, I appreciate that this is low or it's entry level because I GIS I know is so important, but I have no training on it. I wouldn't even know how to approach most GIS tools, and I like I like that this is approachable, like you said.
The other question too, I mean, this is great. I loved this tool and your description of what you're doing here. I'm wondering, other hazards. Obviously, you got the expertise in the flooding, but I'm thinking, in South Florida, a lot of places we have wind hazards that you got to think about mapping, or maybe you could talk a minute about some other kinds of hazards that people could be talking about.
Yeah, I think wind would be interesting. I think it'd be great if you can bring in like some wind data as like if you can import that data into the map and then look at assets on the ground, the buildings and building heights and those kinds of things, and or building materials, and that might be impacted by wind, but also just energy in general. You can look at energy burdens. I think there are probably, and I haven't looked at, I probably need to look at importing the data to make sure you can import, let's see, export as, and you can import some different types of files. But yeah, if you can import other data, then I think this could be pretty powerful also. Where I think this does not have the analysis tools that other platforms have. But for visualization, for overlaying, for identifying features, without having to create a geodatabase or all these, a little bit more complex, activities, I think that's what makes something like this pretty useful. But I would love to explore for other types of hazards. I think once you identify what you want to map, then I think then it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I threw a couple things in the chat there. The climate.gov resilience pages, which are still up, get them while they're hot, and
Yeah.
the climate vulnerability index. And it would be really fun to overlay a couple of those on this and then play with asset
Oh,
mapping
yeah.
with those overlays. So, yeah, good stuff. And I know you need to jump too. Um,
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to keep you from, as someone who did a PhD defense a few years ago, I want to give the person who is presenting a fully prepared Reggie for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good idea. But this has been great. I'm happy to, come back again and talk. I might jump on a few calls now that I subscribed.
Nice.
So,
That's
yeah.
awesome. I learned a lot from this today, and it's really cool to see the stuff visualized out. And yeah, I learned a lot. And thanks again for jumping in last minute. I know that was a bit yeah, it was a little bit last minute. So I really appreciate that. And definitely feel
And
free to join us
Cari,
again.
and Cari would have, given a whole different kind of talk. But I think we're still on the same page. We are both part of what we call HBCU Environmental Justice Technical Collaborative, that is comprised of several faculty and some students and former faculty or students from some HBCUs. And we started it with GIS mapping and then led to GIS mapping for environmental justice. And now it's pretty much tools, developing tools and data and collaborating around environmental justice issues. And so we're on the same team. We do a lot of things together.
Awesome.
Awesome.
I'm glad to be able to represent for her. And of course, for our community as well.
Echo Gina, thanks for jumping in last minute. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now
and
you want to step with me.
we'll see. Maybe Cree can join later. We'll see if I can get her on a clean call, but yeah, I don't want to keep you.
Problem.
So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. You all take care. Have a good rest of your day, afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank
All